Hello aspirants and welcome again to Legacy IAS Academy. In this lecture, we will be discussing or analyzing the Sociology Optional Paper 2 for Mains 2025. So paper 1, which we have already discussed, we saw that paper 1 was on the expected lines, as a result of which considerably quite easy. The same to an extent can be said for paper 2 as well. However, here quite specific questions wherein you need to know that factually these things were asked. But overall this would be of medium difficulty level. So let's get started with respect to Sociology Optional Paper 2. Now as we know, the pattern remains the same. Total 8 questions are there, 4 in section A, 4 in section B. Question number 1st and 5th are compulsory, which are short notes, and you have to do any 5 questions out of these 8. 1 and 5 are compulsory. In addition to these 2 questions, you can do any 3 provided at least one should be done from either section. So the remaining 3 questions out of these 3, at least one should be done from either section, and the 5th one can be of your choice, whichever section you want to choose. So let's get started with respect to the very first question. So the first question talks about short notes. All these 5 questions will be the questions of short notes, and each of 10 marks, and they have specified 150 words. So of course, with respect to the words, it is said that some people say that they can write as much as they want if their writing is small and they can fill the entire paper up to the space available. Fair enough, that is one perspective, but then the idea is there are different questions with different marks and different words, so the word has to have some role in it. That is why, or else every question would have been of same number of words. So try to be within the word limit. 5% here and there is fair enough, but try to be within the word limit. Do not deviate a lot. So let's get started with the very first question and part A of that, short note. So either it will be write a short note on, or small questions they will ask, and this is compulsory. So what the question says, textual perspective is important in understanding Indian social system, discuss. So they are basically asking us the textual perspective. So you should know that the Indo-logical approach of G.S. Ghurye is nothing but the textual perspective. In fact, he uses the Indian scriptures to basically analyze or to study the sociology, to study the society. That means for his sociological analysis, he uses the Indian scripture. So this is the textual perspective. First thing is you should know that. It's very basic. Of course, you will be knowing all these things have been covered in the class. So now the question is, it is important in understanding of Indian social system. So how do we begin with it? You can directly start by saying the importance of it, but rather the introduction could be about the, let's say, the Oriental approach. So you can, in your introduction, you can mention about the Oriental approach and how the Oriental approach was biased against the Indian society and in favor of the West, how it was giving one-sided accentuation positively with respect to the Western world and negatively with respect to Indian society. And to counter that, G.S. Ghurye brought his textual perspective to counter the Orientalist study which was biased against the Indian society. So that will become your introduction. In the main body, then you will go on to talk about how this Indo-logical perspective removed or countered the negativity like the discrimination based on caste, the races, the integration of the tribes are in alien society. All these things was mentioned by the Orientalists. So giving reference to the Indian scriptures, how G.S. Ghurye countered that and how he gave a completely new and positive perspective with respect to the Indian society. So that is what you will talk about, and you can conclude about the overall impact that is there. However, one point of, see, they have asked us to criticize and in sociology, not criticize, they've asked us to discuss. So we will be discussing comprehensively. So one sentence or two about the critique can also come in, wherein you talk about it is a textual approach, not a field study. So you might have to enter the field to actually study the present society. So you criticize that and you conclude in a positive note. Here positive note is not aspiration as such as we mentioned in GS. Positive approach or positive note would be giving the comprehensive addition or improvement in the knowledge that this textual study of GS Ghurye has done. So this is your first short note. Next, question 1b, justify that the Indian traditions are modernizing, full stop. Also discuss the contributing factor. So we need to justify. They have not asked whether the traditions are modernizing or not. They have simply asked us to justify. They have assumed that they are modernizing and asked us to simply justify it. So we will justify in the first half and then also discuss the contributing factors. Remember, they have not mentioned us to list down the contributing factors, rather have asked us to discuss the contributing factors. So how do we begin with? Now, what is modernization of Indian tradition? Basically, M. N. Srinivas has talked about it. Basically, you have westernization and Sanskritization. So here you are going to justify the modernization of Indian tradition, and then if you talk about the contributing factor, you mention the concept of westernization, you are going to mention the concept of Sanskritization. So these are the concepts that you will be mentioning while talking about the contributing factors, and you have to give examples, because in justification you have to give examples as to how you can say that they are actually changing, All right, I hope that's clear. Now, in justification of the Indian traditions, you can talk about there are in justification of traditions that are modernizing. So how are traditions modernizing? Traditions are modernizing as in the traditions are still being conducted, but there are certain changes that have been made, and that has given a modernistic perspective to it. For example, a lot of things now are done online. You can basically do so many things online. You might not be present in your village, in your place for a particular ritual, but you can still be available. So these are small ritual changes that are there, that are happening. At the same time, you have the Sanskritization, wherein the lower caste is going to mimic what the upper caste is doing. So what is happening here, the rituals that were there for the upper caste now is also being done by the lower caste, because they want to mimic them in order to have a high or upward social mobility. So you justify by this and discuss the Sanskritization and westernization. In westernization in India is specifically with respect to the Britishers who came here and westernized our culture. So these are the things that will be discussed in question 1b. Let's move ahead. Next, 1c. According to you, which social reform movement has played the most effective role in uplifting the status of women? Explain. So now here, see, you might get worried about which reform movement I should write, and that is fair enough, but don't waste your time much in identifying them. But what is more important is whatever reform movement that you choose, you should be able to justify it and give good reasoning behind it, because you would be required to explain. Now, there were a lot of reform movements carried out by Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, various other civil societies. In fact, even the backward caste movement and the women movement as well as the backward caste movement have also helped women, because there will be women of the backward caste who are facing the double whammy. You could take that approach as well, that a person is a woman, in addition to it belongs to the backward caste, so this is going to have a double whammy, as a result of which the Dalit movement or the backward caste movement have held. You can take that approach as well, but You can also choose to have a women specific movement also. You can talk about the remarriage, you can talk about the banning of sati, the different movement, remarriage movement by Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. So all those movement is what you are going to talk about. Now, when you are saying that has played the most effective role in uplifting the state of the women, so you will then have to give reasons for that. Let's take for example that you with respect to marriage, the remarriage of the women, in the sense that when they become widow, what was happening was sati, right? So once their husband died, they were committing suicide, they were committing sati by jumping. Suicide is not the right word, sati practice, by jumping into the fire. But then that was stopped. At the same time, they were living alone forever without a partner, but then remarriage also was a movement. So that happened. So what reasons would be there is the freedom of choice. The freedom of choice was given. So talk about this. The freedom to life was given. Talk about this. And these two are the most important factors in uplifting a female, uplifting anyone. These are the most important factors that was provided to them. So these are the things that you can explain under the most important social reform movements for the women. Next, how did the colonial policies for the tribes affected the socio-economic conditions in India? Discuss. Now, the policies of the Britishers for the tribe you should be aware of. So what was the policies? See, the Britishers basically came to India. They were traders. From traders, they converted into rulers. And when they became the rulers, they wanted to grab the land and settle down. So for this, they came up with various different policies. One policy was to directly kick out the tribal people from their region and grab the land. Second was to give them loans, provide them loans at a very exorbitant rate. Now, before providing them loans, they provided them with toxicants like alcohol, liquor kind of toxicants, and made them habitual. And once they were habitual to get more, the Britishers charged them exorbitant rates, and to buy them, they themselves gave them loan. And when they were not able to pay it back, so they grabbed their land. So the tribals were ousted from their own land, as a result of which they became more socio-economically backward. They did not have the recurring income, there is no agriculture, there is nothing, everything which depended on the land. Jad Jungle Zameen, basically. It's not just their home, it is their living, their livelihood, their food, clothing, shelter, everything was taken away. That is why it had a very negative impact on that, but not just in the tribal area but the surrounding area as well. This is what we will be discussing over here, and that problem is existent. You can give reference to the same problem which is present in India today as well, with respect to the displacement of the tribals that happened at that time. It may, or it is still happening even now. To ensure that these conditions do not develop, the rehabilitation will be the need of the hour. Saying that, you can conclude, you can give the reference to present Indian society, the reference of present Indian society, and conclude it on a positive note. Next, how would you appropriate to characterize G.S. Ghurye as a practitioner of theoretical pluralism? So we need to how would we appropriate, means how will we evaluate him with respect to him being categorized as theoretical pluralism? So we should know what is theoretical pluralism. Theoretical pluralism means, see, in sociology you have basically functionalists, you have positivists, you have phenomenologists, so on and so forth, which follow a particular ideology, a particular perspective and theory. Now, theoretical pluralist means someone who is not going to restrict themselves with respect to a single theory, but rather would study the society with respect to multitudes of theory as and when which theory fits. And G.S. Ghurye actually did that. So we are going to evaluate we are going to talk about his characteristic with respect to theoretical pluralism. And yes, we are going to agree that he was theoretically pluralist. How? Because he did not confine himself with one single approach. He had his textual view, of course, but the approach was not a single one, that of, let's say, conflict, that of, let's say, functionalist, but he abided by the text that he was reviewing and then proceeded with respect to what the text said and did not confine. He basically did not confine to one single theory. Is that clear? So we are going to give examples, the various examples he has given in his Indological approach. His approach is considered Indological because he is referring to the Indian text, but the interpretation is not limited to a single theory. So we have to agree to it, give his various theories, various findings that are there, at least 3 to 4 findings we have to provide, and conclude our answer by talking about how he contributed immensely to Indian sociology, or you can start by countering the Western Orientalist hidden agenda and biasness. G.S. Ghurye contributed immensely in Indian sociological approach, which is nothing but Indology. Let's move ahead. So we have done basically the 5. Yes, I think we have done. Yes, we have done the 5 short notes. Now next is question 2A. Question 2A asks, do you think that in a society like India, orthogenetic changes take place through differentiation? Do you observe continuities in the orthogenetic processes? Elaborate your answer with suitable example. So they are talking about basically the orthogenetic changes, the changes in the traditions. Is in sociological approach, it is changes in the tradition. Now remember, orthogenic term can have different meanings depending upon the different subject of studies. For example, in a psychological term, psychological meaning would be the changes in a human being, in the mind of the human being. But in case of sociology, the same thing, here it means the changes that are taking place in the tradition. So in the tradition, so what changes are taking place? So there are traditions, little tradition and the great tradition. So you have to talk about the great tradition and you have to talk about the little tradition. The great tradition that is being followed by the upper caste, the little tradition that is being followed by the backward caste. So you should know these things, right? You should, of course, this is directly present in our syllabus, directly covered in the classes, right? So you talk about the great tradition, you talk about the little tradition. Let's see how the structure will look like. So first you introduce by talking about what is the meaning. So you talk about it is nothing but the changes taking place in the tradition. Then in the main body, you are going to talk about the great tradition first. Then you are going to talk about the little tradition. Then you're going to talk about the changes that are happening, changes in the great tradition, in the little tradition, right? And then you talk about that these changes are happening, but still the society is not moving ahead. You use the concept of Dipankar Gupta's mistake in modernity, that the forces in the society, there are conservative forces, there are liberal forces, they are trying to pull the society at their ends, but because of the pull that is close to equal, of course sometimes some side may have a higher pull, but because of the equivalent pull that is existing presently, the society is stuck in between, mistake in modernity, and then you conclude your answer. I hope that's clear. Let's move ahead to the next question. Agrarian class structure has been undergoing changes due to modern forces. Critically examine, right? So here they are talking about the agrarian class structure that existed. You have now agrarian class structure. How was this class structure? It is agrarian class structure is a mix of, if you take Weber's theory, you can say it's a mix of the economic power, the caste, and the power group or the network that a person is a part of. As per Marx, it will be just the economic power. So you can use Weber's theory over here and talk about how this mix contributed to the class structure. However, then you talk about the modern forces that are present. So modern forces of liberalism, modern forces of, you can talk about in one domain, modern forces here not necessarily or only means technological advancement in agriculture leading to economically affluent and economically weaker section. That will be one of the aspects. But in addition to this, modern forces here would also mean the modern intellectual forces that are there. The modern intellectual forces that are there, the technological advancement that are there, the education that is there, as a result of which social upward mobility is taking place, as a result of which the agrarian class structure may be changing. However, when the social mobility takes place, it is not necessary the entire caste will be socially uplifted. It is only the individual and maximum their family who gets uplifted because of education. So it might be changing, but to an extent it will still be remaining same at a larger perspective, because whenever education, technological advancement, more economic power tries to lift someone socially upward, only them or their family gets lifted, not the entire community belonging to that particular class or caste. So this is what we will discuss over here, because it is critically, they have asked us to critically examine. So in the first part we agreed to it, in the second part to an extent we disagreed to the same concept. Let's move ahead. Next, question 2C. How same-sex marriages are responsible for population dynamics in India? Discuss. Now, how are same-sex marriages responsible? See, by the look of it, you will feel that if there are same-sex marriages, so the birth rates should go down, right? So we can start with that perspective, that it can be a perceived commonsensical knowledge. Common sense and sociology we have seen in paper 1. So commonsensical knowledge would be same-sex marriages are there, so the two people will not be able to give birth to their offspring. So it is a commonsensical knowledge that same-sex marriages are going to reduce the population because the birth rates will go down. That is going to be the first small brief perspective. However, directly it might have no impact on the population dynamics. Why is that the case? Because of technological advancement, what is going to happen is you can have IVF, you can have test tube babies, you can still have babies even if two males are marrying, even if two females are marrying, you can still have a baby through IVF and other technologies. But does that mean it will not have any impact whatsoever? No, but these technologies are available to the affluent. Are they available to the ones who are not that affluent? Absolutely not, because these are costly technologies. So, but then they also can satisfy the need of their children through adoption or may remain childless. Now in that case, since they are adopting or remaining childless, the birth rate is going to go down. So the dynamics would be the net impact of people who are able to get that and have an offspring, or are going for adoption, or are not having any children. At the same time, certain affluent people can also, instead of going for IVF, can have adoption. So it is going to be a net outcome of these particular things which you will be discussing in your answer. I hope that's clear. Let's move ahead. Next, question 3A. What do you mean by nation building? What is the role of religion in nation building? Elaborate your answer. So we need to first understand what is nation building, so then only we'll be able to explain. So a nation, what is a nation actually? Is the nation just, is a nation just, let's say, a piece of land? Absolutely not. It is not. So the questioning approach can also be there. Is a nation a piece of land? No, absolutely not. On a piece of land, if there are different people of different citizenship are staying, there may not be that much of solidarity. So what is required? Solidarity is required. People need to be identifying each other with the tired past, etc., etc. They should have unity, they should have solidarity. So what? Does that mean that they can live in different regions and still have solidarity? Yes, but then won't it be the best thing wherein you have a common region or a common land, you have a common identity, you can have a common, let's say, origin, you can have a common culture, you can have basically certain common rituals would be common. Yes, absolutely. And that also happens because of the common region. For example, the Indian Muslims actually have certain regions which are more close to the rituals that are there of the non-Muslims or the Hindus, and in the same manner you will have Hindus, Christians, Muslims doing certain rituals which are similar during the marriages or let's say during the death of a person. And these rituals, so an Indian Muslim's ritual during marriage or death etc. would be similar to the rituals of the other religions in India and very dissimilar to the Muslims of the countries away from India. So what happens is the geographical region begins to give you similarity. Now all these things together lead to the formation of the nation, which is known as nation building process. Now here we need to understand what is the role of religion in nation building. See, in nation building, the role of religion. So you can basically talk about the functionalist aspect of religion in nation building. We have to talk about how religion is going to bring in solidarity. Now it is going to bring in solidarity, we are talking about, absolutely, but solidarity of two types are there. So we will use Durkheim's concept of solidarity and mention about it. First, you can talk about mechanical solidarity. So you can talk about that mechanical solidarity exists, and mechanical solidarity exists over here. Okay? It is, let's say the religions are homogeneous, that means there are same religion that presents, so everyone is belonging to the same religion. So what will happen? They will have the mechanical solidarity. But India does not have same religion. We have various religions that are there. So these various religions are going to lead to a solidarity which is even of a higher level, that is organic solidarity. So this is how you use the Durkheim's concept and talk about how it is going to lead to organic solidarity. That is the explanation of role of religion in the India's nation building, generally in the nation building, specifically in India's nation building. So let's move on to the next question, that is 3B. Now here the question says, do you think that the new economic reforms of the British rule, so we are talking about now the British rule and the new economic reforms that they brought in, so do you think that they have disrupted the old economic systems of India? So yes, we will probably agree to it, but let's look what the question further says. Substantiate your answer with suitable examples. So here they are asking, do you think that they have disrupted? If yes, then substantiate your answer with examples. If no, then also substantiate your answer with examples. So of course, yes, we know that they have. Now it is up to us how we are going to project that. So first you can start. Now look, let's understand the framework of this answer. First, in the introduction, we'll start by mentioning what in general, what were the things that were a part of the new economic reforms of the British, with what intention did they bring in that, what was the reason for which they brought in that. So you can talk about the reasons as to why that was brought in. Then in the main body, we are going to talk about what are these new economic reforms and how did they disrupt the old economic system of India. So this is going to be our main body as to how the old one has disrupted, how the new economic reforms had disrupted the old, and while we explain them, we are going to substantiate, that means elaborate our answers with suitable examples. So what were the new economic reforms? So if you talk about the new economic reforms and what approach did they have? So for example, the Britishers were focusing on deindustrialization with respect to the Indian capitalists, with respect to their own profits, yes, What the Britishers used to do is take all the raw materials from India, take it to their own country, use those raw materials in their industries, convert it into the finished goods, sell it to the rest of the world, including India. Yes, the affluent kings, the princes, etc., those were there, they also used to buy these finished goods. So they were industrializing, but only industrializing in Britain. Industrialization was happening in Britain for them. Whereas in India, what was the case? In India, India was rather deindustrializing. India was rather deindustrializing. That is the case. Plus, if you have the man-made things, that are goods that are being produced, the artisans that are there, they were also ousted, because now you have the factory finished goods which are going to replace the handwork or the labor. At the same time, the new economic reforms with respect to agriculture, so not just the industrial sector, but with respect to agriculture also we'll talk about. For example, the growth of cash crops started happening more, because they could get more benefits to the landlords, and the Britishers can also earn more. At the same time, the crops that are grown were not dependent with respect to the requirement of food, but with respect to the requirement of the money that they can generate, or the crops that are used for the industrialization or the industrial activity of the Britishers. Then there were systems like the permanent settlement system, the Riotwari system, the Mehelwari system that were brought in. So they also distorted the old economic measures or the old economic system that was present in India. So yes, with the help of the examples, we are clearly going to tell how it actually disrupted. Now, to a very small amount, you can mention the impact in one paragraph about it, right? You can mention the impact of one paragraph about it and then subsequently conclude your answer. I hope that is clear. Now, this answer could be very generic. That is why utilization of sociological terms becomes very important, like pauperization, like homogenization. Homogenization of cropping happened. Only monocropping was being done. Pauperization, people were becoming more poorer by the day. Relative deprivation was high. So all these would be the impact. Let's move ahead to the next question. Describe the main features of the Indian new middle class. How is it different from the old middle class? So middle class, again, it's a direct topic from our syllabus. Now, in that topic, we are told about the emergence of the middle class that happened during the British period, when there were the babus who were working in the office, the salaried employees, the white collar people who are getting jobs with monthly salary, especially in the British India government also at that time. This was the genesis of the middle class. Now that is the old middle class that we are talking about, that continued even after the independence. Then you have the Indian new middle class. So the Indian new middle class, which is presently also existing. So we are asked about the main features of the Indian new middle class first, and then how is it different from the old one. So if you talk about, so in the introduction, we can directly talk about who is the Indian new middle class. So this is not immediately after the independence. This is the very recent phenomena with the coming up of the huge amount of the service sectors, the information and communication technology revolution, so on and so forth. Those are our new middle class. That is our new middle class. It is majorly in the private sector. Anyhow, the government jobs are declining, the private jobs are increasing, so they are in the private sector. They are mainly in the services sector, so on and so forth. Now, how do they differ from the old middle class? So if you talk about the old middle class, genesis of which is found in the British India, right? The genesis of which is found in the British India. These were the government officials called as the babus, who were the salaried employees. Generally, the then middle class was made up of the lawyers, the doctors, the teachers, right? All those form the earlier middle class, a lot of them were also learned from outside of India as well, or under the British educational system. It continued after independence that these salaried government job babus were called as middle class, but now you have the private sector, the service sector, and that is the main difference that you are going to talk about it. All right, you can add a lot more perspective to it with respect to the gender. So previously in the old middle class, it would be dominated by the males, but more and more labor force participation of the females is there. So the new middle class has a more equal distribution. It is still unequal, but compared to the old one, it is equal. So sexual division of labor as such is lesser in the new middle class as was there in the old middle class. So these are the sociological terminologies that you should be using over here. Let's move ahead with respect to next question. Who is said to be the pioneer of village studies in India? Now the pioneer is M.N. Srinivas. So this is a factual thing which you should know anyhow. When we do this chapter, you will be knowing it. Illustratively, describe the contributions of some Indian sociologists on village studies. So we have to describe the contributions of certain Indian sociologists. You can take the help of M.N. Srinivas as well. In addition to M.N. Srinivas, S.C. Dubey, then you have A.R. Desai, so on and so forth. You utilize these 3-4 sociologists to basically describe basically provide their contribution with respect to village studies in India. Now, along with it, as you do that, see, certain times the part of the question would be different, but you can address them together. So what the question further says, how their approaches are distinct from each other. So you can do both the things together in one. So let us see how we will go about it. So first of all, who is said to be the pioneer of village studies in India? Just don't write directly the name. Just describe a bit, talk about him and his study, and along with that mention the name. For example, structural functionalist M.N. Srinivas, who has worked in this field, the study of Rampur village, his famous study, is basically known as. So M.N. Srinivas, who has come out with this study, who has a structural functionalist approach, is considered to be the pioneer of village studies in India. And so this would be your introduction. In the main body, you start with his own study of the Rampur village and talk about his functionalist approach, wherein he talks about that the caste system that exists is having a functionalist aspect to it using the Jajmani system. So you mention about the Jajmani system, how the Jajmani system functioned because of the presence of the caste system, and how it was functional to the village of Rampur, and hence the functionalist approach. Now contrast it with respect to, you can contrast this particular thing with respect to A.R. Desai's conflict approach. A.R. Desai's conflict approach, which is as good as opposite to the functionalist approach. Then you add a holistic approach of S.C. Dubey. S.C. Dubey. In fact, you can also use Andre Beatty. Andre Beatty, his approach is similar to the approach of Max Weber, who talks about the power does not come only from the caste in the village, it has multitude of other factors as well. So you talk about Andre Beatty as well. So you describe them, and also while you're describing them, you're telling how they are different from each other. That is why functionalist, then complete opposite, then S.C. Dubey, who takes into account a lot of factors, which is a more comprehensive way of describing the Indian villages or study of Indian villages. So these are the major things. There are more you can add. A.R. Radcliffe Brown, you have Malinowski, you have a lot of other people who have also done. You can include them. You can include, of course, one Orientalist also. So let's say you include, let's say, Metcalfe or maybe any other. You can include Malinowski, Radcliffe Brown. So you can include others also, because these are all indigenous. Majorly this, you can also talk about G.S. Ghurye's contribution in it. But when it comes to the village studies, these three are quite important. So make sure you use them. Next, industrial question 4. B. Industrial class structure is a function of social structure. So they are saying industrial class structure is a function of social structure of Indian society. Do you agree with this statement? Analyze. So yes, see, in India, the economic status, the social status are interacting with each other. So yes, the industrial class structure will be a function of social structure, and the social structure can also have the element of industrial class structure using Max Weber's theory of power, Max Weber's trinitarian theory of power, using Andre Bete's concept of dispersion of power in various things, not just the caste. Using these aspects, we can talk about that in the social structure of the Indian society, there is a hierarchy that exists of the upper caste, upper class, so on and so forth. Now, that is not only dependent upon the caste system, but also dependent upon the economic system. The economic system comes from where? It basically comes from the ownership, non-ownership, the job that you do, and industrial class is one such class which does certain jobs. So if you are a lower caste but earning well, your social status would be higher than a lower caste who is not earning well. So it will be a mix of both the things, as a result of which you will probably agree to an extent, and you are asked to analyze. So will you only agree? No. So how will be the answer looking like? You talk about first the industrial class and the social structure interplay. Then you talk about how industrial class affects the social structure using Max Weber, right? So you are going to explain this. Then the resultant mobility or a status or a hierarchy a person has is a combination of both. However, before you conclude, one paragraph should be about how caste may still at times hold more superiority as compared to the class, and then you conclude your answer talking about the interplay. Let's move ahead. Question is now, what is kinship? Now this is very factual. Briefly explain G.P. Murdoch's contribution to the study of kinship system. So first you need to define what kinship is, give example, how it can be through blood ties, how it can be through matrimonial ties. Do not forget to mention here. So you will be first. So in the introduction only, you start by defining what is kinship. Then you talk about how it is established through the blood ties, how it can be established through the marriage, as well as adoption can also start a kinship system. So do not forget adoption. Generally we write this and we forget, but this is also going to be important. This is going to be your introduction and the first half of body. Then you talk about G.P. Murdoch's contribution to the study of kinship system. So you talk about the study of his studies of kinship system using various things. For example, universality of nuclear family. Universality of nuclear family, in which he said that nuclear family exists throughout the world. In every geographical region it exists, so that is why it is universal and it is the way forward for the society. However, that does not mean joint family does not exist. It does. In fact, joint family will exist, and if it breaks down into nuclear family, the nuclear family can again reconstitute into joint family. So those things are also there. Plus you talk about the functional joint nature, the functional joint nature of family. That means a joint family might have segregated, dispersed, fragmented, living in different regions, places, but still functionally they are joined. They send money to each other, they come and meet each other, they take care of each other. When there is an event, when there is a ritual, they again come to each other. So they come back to their pavilion, to the place of their origin together and celebrate, mourn, whatever the event is, they come together. So these are the things that you are going to mention about his contribution to the study of kinship system. And you add it on a positive note as to how it has given a huge amount of uplift to the study of the kinship system. Moving ahead. So this was section A. Now quite easy on the expected line. Let us now look at section B. The transfer of land from cultivating to the non-cultivating owners is bringing about transformation in Indian society. Now what is happening is, we'll understand first, see what the entire question is. Justify your answer by giving suitable illustrations. So they have made a statement and asked you to justify over here. Now what is happening, especially in the Haryana region, Delhi NCR region, a lot of land is being sold. Now in that, what is happening is, when the land is being sold, sometimes the agricultural land is sold, but later on it might be used for non-cultivation purposes. That is what is being asked. Transfer of land from cultivating to non-cultivating owners is bringing about transformation in Indian society. So basically the agrarian nature of the Indian society will go down, the service or the industrial nature of the society will go up. This is one thing. Second, when you are selling, the recurring payment that you are accruing is going down, and you get one-time payment itself. So that one-time payment can also lead to a lot of social issues. You can quote the Rajya Sabha TV's report, which talks about when there is a huge amount of lump sum received by a poor person, there is seen to be an increase in the child marriages. So all those social evils that it can cause. It is also leading to unemployment, because the people who have sold the land, who were earlier agriculture, don't know as such what to do next. At the same time, the productivity etc. will also be gone, because the land is now being used for the non-agricultural purposes. It will also lead to inequality, pauperization, etc. So this is what you are going to write. It's a 10 marker. So you will be mentioning about these issues that are happening. Let's move ahead. Bring out various factors responsible for the declining of village industries in India. Factors responsible for declining. So there are certain push factors. For example, in let's say in villages, the facilities etc. are not there, so people would want to venture out. There is an issue of the scale. At the village level, you will be able to do at a very small scale. There is an issue of sexual division of labor, right? Again, so what happens is, in village industries, you have, there is a lot of out migration from village to the urban area, so only the aged, the children, the women are left behind. Now in that case, the industries, the workforce in the villages are quite less, so lack of skill etc. All these, lack of labor, lack of skill etc., the scale of the thing, the push that is there, the pull of the the pull of the urban area, the corporatization of the industry etc. You write these 5-6 parameters and explain them each in detail, and talk about how it is basically responsible for the shift. Let's move ahead. Discuss the social basis of political mobilization in independent India. First off, has some change occurred in these during the last 60-70 years? So they are talking about discuss the social basis of political mobilization. That means when in democracy, the political parties would want to mobilize us, that is political mobilization. What was the social basis of that? Has some changes occurred? So you trace it from the independence. You talk about caste-based mobilization, right? Class-based mobilization. Now you also have religion-based mobilization. Now all this has, see, you may see religion-based mobilization now. That does not mean it was not there previously. It was there previously as well. Caste-based, it was there previously as well. Class-based, it was there previously as well. It is there now as well. Now these things were quite high, right? Now also they are high, but now they are added with various other things. For example, based on the gender, right? You can talk about based on the gender also, based on people's sexual orientation also, that is LGBTQ plus etc. So these are some new forms of social mobilization that is also existing with the help especially of the digital platform. So the old one plus the new one. So this is how it has changed. It has, these things have not lost its value. It is still there, but in addition to this, many other have existed, is what we will be mentioning here. Let's move ahead. What are the major problems faced by the labor migrants while working in informal sector in India? Now remember, there are two things that they are mentioning here. One, the sector is informal sector. This is the first thing. So they will face certain issues. Next, they are labor who are migrants. This is the second issue that they will face. Now, whatever informal sector issue exists, it exists for everyone. That we will write. That will be low salary, right? No security net, no safety net, no perks, no benefits, all that. Plus, they are migrant laborers, so they may face regionalism. They may face regionalism, right? They may face the conflict, right? All these things, they may face challenges. They may face cultural, you have to write in sociological terms, so they may face cultural shock as well. So all these issues will be faced by the labor migrants. Now, since you are asked to discuss, right, so in one paragraph you talk about even after these challenges, why they still come over here due to the push factor that is there, and you can conclude by writing the solution as to what solution can be provided, and you conclude your answer. I hope that's clear. Let's move ahead. Do you think that law has been able to abolish child labor in India? Comment. Now we will start the introduction by mentioning the provisions that are there against the child labor. So the child labor, the statutory backing that that prohibition of child labor has prohibition. So we'll be talking about prohibition of child labor first. So here we'll be first talking about, in the introduction, we will talk about the prohibition of child labor, the act that is there. You can talk about under the fundamental rights, right? So in the introduction, you can quickly mention the provisions that are there, which are working towards the abolition of the child labor, which are trying to prohibit the child labor. Now, the main thing is, do you think that the law has been able to abolish? So majorly we will agree. So we will be talking about the agreement. You can write down some numbers with respect to the decline in the child labor that is there. There are punitive measures for it, right? Plus there are various schemes which are providing free education. There is right to education, which is enticing, facilitating people to send their children to school rather than send them to work. There are benefits that are there, midday meal scheme, etc. So various things have been done which have actually tried to address it. However, then you talk about, to some extent it will still remain. Why? For example, the culture of poverty. Now the culture of poverty is there. The culture of poverty wherein, people are generationally poor. So you talk about the generational poverty, all those things which does not let the people come out of it, and they need resources, so they don't educate their children as such. You look at children as economic resources. So those things are there. Plus you have the the subculture of poverty, wherein someone is poor, let's say they are doing robbery, etc. That robbery, we find it to be not a good thing, but in certain subcultures it is considered to be a thing of pride, as a result of which there are subcultures wherein child is looked at as the economic resource, so on and so forth. So it still exists. You can conclude your answer by talking about the other solutions that can be provided with respect to sensitization, more benefits, incentivization of not putting child in the child labor. Let's move ahead. Question 6A. In what respects have the constitutional provisions changed the socio-economic and political conditions? Change the socio-economic, that means the social status, the economic status, and the political conditions of the scheduled caste and the scheduled tribes in India. Critically examine. Critically examine means we will of course agree, but at the same time we will also be disagreeing and mentioning why it might not be the case. So first of all, with respect to the constitutional provision, so you can talk about the Panchayati Raj system. You will talk about the Panchayati Raj system, which the Constitutional Amendment Act provided for reservation for the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. and how it has led to improvement in their socio-economic condition, improvement in their political conditions, because now they are holding more political power, more offices are being held by them. And then use Max Weber's theory of diffused power, wherein it is not just the caste but the economic and the political power, as a result of which this has led them for upward social mobility. This is one side. Now what will be the other side? The other side will talk about these things. Because of these things, there are higher antagonism. There are higher antagonism against these castes now, because now they are also getting more political power. So there is more antagonism by the people, by the upper caste against them, as a result of which more deprivation, more social exclusion is also happening. So this is the other side. So you reconcile the two and talk about what could be the solutions and then conclude your answer. I hope that's clear. Let's move on to the next question. 6b, discuss the trend of urbanization in India. So here in the introduction you have to talk about the trend that in 1950s around 17% of urbanization was there, which has now increased to around 37%, which by 2050 is going to be over 50%. So these small amount of statistics you need to put, and then talk about the trend that has been there. So now there are more and more metropolitan tier 1 cities coming up. Tier 2, tier 3 is going to be getting converted into tier 1. Certain surrounding areas which are undeveloped are going to develop into cities. That is the trend that is happening in India. Do you think that industrialization is the only? Absolutely not. It is a very important precondition, but definitely not the only. The only precondition, give your arguments. So we will talk about then how industrialization is an important precondition or an important prerequisite. It is a prerequisite, and explain why that is the case. Because when industries come, the capitalists want the people to work for longer hours. They don't want the people to be separated from the family every time, take leave and go back. So they would want them to settle here. Small colonies, temporary colonies are created. They stay back, they work there, they stay there. Now since people are staying here only, they would need basic necessities, so other things will also start developing, businesses will start develop, as a result of which, along with industrialization, you will see that urbanization is also happening. That is why industrialization is a basic prerequisite. But in addition to that, there are various other things you need. You need the services sector to come, you need the logistics, transportation, etc., which is also required to come into place in order to ensure that urbanization actually happens. With this, you conclude your answer. Next, which measures would you suggest for preventing caste conflicts in India? So your introduction would be talking about what kind of caste conflicts or the caste conflicts that are happening in India, giving some recent examples, right? And in brief you are going to talk about the reason for the caste conflict, and then you talk about in detail, you are going to talk about the measures, right? So in brief would be the disparity that is there, the upper caste, lower caste, the antagonism that is there, the difference in the mobility level or the status level in the class, in the society that is there, because of which the castes are antagonistic to with each other. You will be mentioning that. Then you have what measures would you suggest? Measures to suggest: provide for social upward mobility, provide for sensitization of the people, right? Provide for sensitization, ensure that politicization of caste does not take place, and ensure that antagonism of caste does not take place, ensure that any caste based discrimination, etc., are prohibited through various different provisions. So you talk about the solutions and you conclude your answer. Let's move ahead. What are the private and public network and support systems operative in Indian society for the aged? Suggest measures to curb down the challenges before caregivers. So what are the private and public support systems operative? So first of all, you have the government. Then you have the NGOs. Then you have the private players. Government provides certain benefits to the aged people. There are NGOs specifically taking care of the aged people. There are private institutions which charge a lot of money, but they also take care of the individuals. So these three are definitely there. You mentioned about that. And if you talk about the public network, do not forget to add the joint family, which also takes care. Nuclear family also, the people, the children take care. Plus in joint family, there is more support. Now, suggest measures to curb down the challenges before caregivers. So first, mention the challenges that are existing. Challenges that are existing in front before the caregivers of the aged. So the money is very less. The training is not there. So money is less. Inadequate training is there. Right? Inadequate training is there. It is a highly sensitive job. So all these things are the concern, as a result of which more investments are needed so that more money flows in, so more skilled people can be there. Training specifically for that can be provided. The onus can be there on the individuals, on the children, to take care of their parents, of their grandparents, so on and so forth. All these things could be the solution that could be provided. But yes, last solution is more of we taking care. But if you are, the question is asking about challenges for the caregivers. So money, inadequate training, high sensitivity required, high risk job, all those can be the concerns. So you talk about the solutions of that and then you conclude your answer. Let's move ahead. The educational development is the only panacea for countries' all ills and evils. No, that cannot be, of course. And anyhow, they have asked critically examine, but that does not mean we write yes, of course, that cannot be. We are going to be very subjective and diplomatic while writing our answers. I hope that's clear. So educational development is the only panacea. So first, in the introduction, you start about how education is important. Then you explain how education plays an important role. What role does it play? Number one, it plays the role of social change, in which it plays the role of social upward mobility. Right? Social change, social upward mobility. It empowers. It is going to economically empower. It can lead to gender empowerment also. It can reduce inequality. However, education alone is not going to be enough. Education alone is definitely not going to be enough. Why it's not going to be enough? Then you talk about the critique part. Then let's talk about the critique part. The critique part would be that education, even though it is providing with upward mobility, it is not providing the upward mobility for the entire section of that community, but rather provides upward mobility only for the specific person. For example, in a family, let's say there is an SC/ST or a Dalit, basically a Dalit family, for example. Someone gets educated, someone gets a job. So does that mean that the entire SC/ST Dalit community will get empowered? Absolutely not. The impact are quite limited. Only that person might get empowered. Only their family might get certain higher amount of status in the society, but not all of them. Plus, it does not mean that they will no longer face discrimination based on caste. They will still face discrimination based on caste. So education will not be the panacea. Then what else needed? Just think of things that can lead to social change. For example, political backing is needed. Means political backing as in legal laws needs to be brought in. Sensitization needs to be made. All these things, economic empowerment, etc., along with sensitization, legal backing, etc., is required in order to actually avoid all the educational development, all the ills and evils that are present. Right? So ills and evil not just related to the discrimination based on caste, but the class, but the crime, but the social crimes, etc., that are happening. I hope it's clear. Let's move ahead. Question 7C, how Dalit movements in India have facilitated their identity formation? Analyze. So we need to here first talk about what is the Dalit movement. You can take certain examples about the different Dalit, sub-Dalit movements are also there, and what was it all about. Right. So how Dalit movements in India facilitated their identity formation. First of all, in the introduction, you can talk about as to why the Dalit movement took place in the first place. Right. Why did it take place? It take place because their identity was an issue. How do they identify themselves with? They were considered as the untouchable caste. Now, where to an extent outside the fold, right? So now, what is their identity? Okay, that itself is a question. So they wanted to establish their identity first itself. And to establish their identity, they come up with the Dalit movement. Now, the word Dalit means the oppressed. So they wanted to be known as the oppressed class, so that people know that they are the one who are oppressed. I hope that's clear. So that is why Dalit movement had started. Now it is going to facilitate their identity formation. Why? Because the reason to start the movement itself was to establish their identity. I hope that's clear. So they wanted to establish their identity. That is why these movements were brought in. But this will just be your introduction part. In the main body, you are going to talk about how it led or how it facilitated their identity formation. Now, it created their identity, which is separate. It's not in relation to their religion, not in relation to their caste, but in relation to their socio-economic condition. So they made them stand basically separate with respect to their socio-economic condition. So that's a separate from their religion, right? They are now being classified as the oppressed class. Again, not. So the way now we are classifying them is not in respect to their caste or religion, but with respect to the situation they are in, which is giving them a separate identity. So those chronological things you'll have to talk about, and then you have to analyze it. So we'll talk about these things and mention the socio-economic nature, the oppressed nature, the identity with respect to the same disadvantaged situation, so on and so forth. Then you talk about what positive impact that it have and conclude your answer. I hope that's clear. Let's move on to question 8A. Is it possible to have a sustainable development in India? We see that cite major environmental issues and suggest a few measures to achieve sustainability. So this is the first part, this is the second part, and this is the third part. So first is it possible to have sustainable development in India? So first you talk about that India is striving for it. Yes, you mentioned that, and you talk about how. First you talk about India striving for it. Then in the main body you talk about how it's possible, how it is possible and why you think it is possible. You will mention that. Then cite major environmental issues. So then next you will talk about the environmental issues. This is a very straightforward question. Talk about the environmental issues that are happening. Talk about environment versus development. Talk about deforestation, degradation, soil degradation, so on and so forth, and pollution, etc. And then you need to suggest the measures to achieve sustainability. What measures you can take to achieve sustainability? For example, renewable fuels are being used, organic farming is being done, the rate of extraction should be less than the replenishment rate, so on and so forth, is what you will talk about and conclude on a positive note. Here you should specifically ensure that your conclusion is not just the solution. Solution can be separate, conclusion can be very positive, which will link it to the first part of the question with respect to is it possible to achieve it. Let's move ahead. Next, do you think that forced displacement of laborers has caused their deprivation and resultant inequalities during the recent past? So see, the questions are very direct. Do you think? Yes, in most of the cases the answer is yes, that has happened, but the answer is not very objective. You have to explain, you have to illustrate, you have to give example why that is the case. So you are asked to elaborate here. So talk about the forced displacement. So you begin your answer by introducing what issues the forced displacement causes. Then you explain in detail the issues. First of all, when you are forcibly displaced, you are displaced from your own land. Now for us in the urban areas or even rural areas, the land which as such, especially in urban areas, the land, if someone is displaced from their house because a road is passing through that, what will happen is the government may compensate them, give them money. Now they can buy the land in the same city and they can do their job, they can do their work, even in a different city, different state, they can do it. But when the land of the tribal, when the land of the villagers, that land is taken away, which is not just their economic wealth, it's their social wealth, it is their culture, it is their livelihood, it is their food, clothing, shelter, everything. So when you take that away, everything is lost. That's point number one. Point number two, they are not trained in doing anything else other than utilizing the land for everything they want. So they are not even trained in that, as a result of which no amount of compensation as such is going to work, and they will be out of job, they will not have recurring income, the money that is given to them might be used for child marriages, especially the female child marriages. So that is going to deprive them and result in inequalities. And you give the examples of the recent past wherein there were different construction projects, because of which construction project is one example because of which people were displaced. Now remember, displacement of laborers, talking about laborers here. So laborers can be in the agricultural sector, laborers can be in the urban sector, so, or the tribal laborers can also be there, right? So in that manner, you don't restrict yourself just to the tribe or to the villages, talk about the urban ones as well. So make sure you talk about the rural, you talk about the urban, you talk about all the labors that are existing, and give examples and conclude your answer. I hope that's clear. Let's move ahead. What are the Indian government's schemes launched for poverty alleviation after United Nations Declaration of Sustainable Development Goals, that is 2015? So they have simply asked the scheme and asked you to briefly describe those schemes. Again, a very straightforward question. So we will talk about the major schemes that are there. The schemes launched for poverty alleviation. All right, I hope that's clear. So you have the PM Kisan, right? You have the various Bima Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Suraksha Bima Yojana, Fasal Bima Yojana, Jeevan Jyoti Bima Yojana. All these things are there. There is in fact Startup India scheme is also there, because that is also going to provide, may convert the job seeker into a job giver by microfinances. You can talk about that. You can talk about Startup India, Stand Up India project as well. You can talk about Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana as well. You can, as I said, you can talk about Pradhan Mantri Suraksha Bima Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Jeevan Jyoti Bima Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, Atal Pension Yojana. Chalo, theek hai, you can avoid that. This plus you have the Ayushman Bharat scheme, right? All these schemes, you describe two, three lines for them and relate it to one of the sociological terminologies. At least half of them you can relate it to social. Reduces. You talk about Startup India. So Stand Up India has a reservation for the SCs, STs, and the women. So when there is reservation, you talk about specific focus on gender empowerment. You talk about it ensures or it addresses the issue of social exclusion. So we will be relating these things with respect to the sociological terms, right? It's a 10 marker, so three lines you will not be able to write. Maybe you write 5, 6 out of this. Write different kinds of, don't write all the insurance yojana, the Bima, that means insurance schemes that are there, right? You can write the 3 names, describe one, or write one and tell about its impact. Write this because it has a reservation also. Then write this, it is going to cover all the rural areas. Write this, it is going to cover majorly the urban people who want to start small business. Then write this, which is pan-India. So in this, the holistic schemes you will write, and write a couple of statements for each one of them. and you end this thing on a positive note. India has been quite good in alleviating poverty. These schemes are helping, and presently our poverty rate has gone down to 11% as per Niti Aayog. Extreme poverty is 5.3%. It will be very soon that India will become a country without poor people. That should be our aspiration. So this was the paper 2. A lot of questions, very direct, and certain questions look like GS questions. They are not, because we are going to link it to gender empowerment, we are going to link it to social exclusion, we are going to link it to sexual division of labor. So you have to link it with the sociological terms in order to make your answer sociological. Thank you.